"You are performing again," he said, and stepped over my outstretched hand like it was nothing. My fingers were still curled around the loom's edge. The thread had gone cold. I had maybe 3 hours of light left in me, maybe less, and he wanted to discuss my performance. I said nothing. There was nothing left I was willing to spend on him. The gold leaves you the way warmth leaves a room when no one notices the window is open, quietly, without drama, until the cold has been there so long it feels like the only thing that was ever true. He would understand that. One day. If you've ever kept giving to someone who called it performance, stay. This one is for you. I have a system for new places. I catalog the exits first. Then the load-bearing walls, metaphorical ones, the kind that tell you who actually holds a room together when the person at the top is absent. Then I find the one person who makes eye contact when everyone else is busy performing their own indifference. That person, in my experience, always knows more than they should. The court of vampire King Declan Clifford occupied a converted rail baron's mansion on the edge of Lincoln's historic district, a street of heavy iron gates and restored limestone facades where the neighbors, if they were wise, had learned not to ask questions about the family at the end. November had settled over the city, like something that intended to stay. The elms along the boulevard had gone bare weeks ago. The sky, when I arrived, was the flat white of paper that's been left too long in a damp room. I noticed a young woman in the entrance hall who stopped pretending to arrange flowers the moment I walked in. Her eyes tracked me with the particular attention of someone who has been told what to expect and is measuring whether the reality matches the warning. It rarely does. The steward who received me was a man named Aldrich Fenn, tall, deliberate, the kind of stillness that reads as professional rather than natural. He walked me through the house with the precision of someone who has given the same tour so many times it has become a form of territory marking rather than welcome. He told me where I would sleep, where I would eat, where I would not go. He did not tell me where the king slept, but I noted the wing of the house where the corridors held their cold differently, not drafty cold, not the old building kind. The specific cold of something that has stopped needing warmth. The weaving chamber was on the 3rd floor, north-facing, which was correct. Glimmer work requires the light that comes before dawn, the particular gray-blue that falls without direction, without shadow. The loom they had prepared was adequate. I ran my fingers along the frame, checking the tension in the uprights, and the wood vibrated faintly under my touch the way old instruments do when they recognize what they were made for. I did not meet the king that first day. He was, Aldrich informed me, occupied. I unpacked my materials with the methodical focus of someone who has learned that rituals of preparation keep the mind from going to the places it shouldn't, and I did not let myself think about what the first pull of glimmer would feel like until I was already at the loom, and it was too late to reconsider. The first thread of it left me like a long exhale. Not painful. That's the thing no one tells you, and the thing I had never quite believed until my teacher, who died 3 winters ago in a rented room in Omaha, tried to explain it to me. She said, "It doesn't hurt the way you expect. It's more like being poured." I had not understood that then. I understood it now, the precise, quiet sensation of something at my center releasing, moving outward through my hands and into the silk, leaving behind a warmth that was also an absence. I worked for 2 hours. The silk responded the way good silk does when it's been fed properly. It began to glow at the edges, faintly, the color of amber held up to a candle. A good sign. The memory was taking. When I finally climbed the stairs to the room they had given me, I held onto the banister the whole way. I told myself it was the cold. I slept for 14 hours. When I woke, there was a tray of food outside my door that had gone cold. Next to it, a folded piece of paper, a note from Aldrich informing me that the king would review my progress at 7 the following evening, and that he expected to see significant advancement by then. I read it twice. I set it down on the nightstand. Then I sat on the edge of the bed and looked at my hands for a long time, the faint tremor in the left one, barely visible, the kind of thing you'd miss if you weren't looking for it. I had not had that tremor before this commission. I had not had it in Omaha, or in the 2 smaller jobs before that, the ones that paid the bills and kept me off anyone's radar. This was different. I had known it would be different. That was why I took the contract. I folded that knowledge carefully and put it somewhere I wouldn't have to look at directly, and went to wash my face and thought about breakfast and did not think about the tremor. Lincoln is one of those cities that keeps its old agreements quietly. You'd have to know what to look for, certain buildings that don't age right, certain faces that appear in photographs across too many decades. I had heard stories. Most witches had. The ones who came here did not tend to leave quickly. I had told myself I would be the exception. Standing at the window of my room with the cold coming off the glass in waves I could feel against my collarbone, watching the bare elms along the boulevard bend in a wind I couldn't hear through the triple-glazed panes. I was no longer entirely sure. The second silk went up on the third morning, and my hands had not stopped shaking since the night before. Not the dramatic kind of shaking. Nothing that would announce itself across a room. The kind that lives in the fine muscles, the ones that control precision, thread tension, the exact degree of pressure needed to coax glimmer into a clean line rather than a blur. I noticed it first when I reached for my tea, and the cup ticked against the saucer twice before I studied it. I set the cup down and did not pick it up again. The work was harder, the way the second mile is always harder than the first. Not because the distance changes, because you now know exactly how far you have to go. I was 3 hours into the morning's weaving when I became aware of being watched. Not the passive observation of the household staff moving through their routines, something more deliberate. I kept my eyes on the loom. The silk was mid-formation, pulling from the memory fragment Aldrich had delivered 2 days prior, a court conflict from Declan's 3rd century, apparently, though the fragment itself had no label. The colors told me enough. Deep iron blue and ochre, men arranged in the geometry of confrontation, a room lit by something that was not quite fire. When I finally turned, the young woman from the entrance hall, the one who had watched me arrive with that measuring attention, was standing at the far end of the chamber, a stack of linen in her arms she had clearly forgotten she was holding. Her name, I would learn, was Petra. She was perhaps 24, sharp-faced in the way that comes from paying close attention to everything. She was not looking at me with the veiled curiosity the other staff offered. She was looking at my hands. I gave her nothing. I turned back to the loom. She left without speaking. The linen, I noticed, was still in her arms. He came at dusk. I heard him before I saw him, not footsteps, exactly, but the particular quality the air takes on when someone accustomed to authority moves through a space. The room does not change. You simply become aware that you are in it. Declan Clifford stopped 2 feet behind me and studied the finished silk. I kept working on the second piece. He was quiet for long enough that I counted my breath to stay even. 4 in, 4 out, hands moving. Do not look at him. Do not give him the satisfaction of your attention before he has earned it. The silk caught the low lamplight and held it, the completed memory glowing with the warm amber that meant the weave had taken cleanly. 40 hours of work, the finest thing I had produced in 3 years. He made no sound. I risked a glance. His face. I had prepared myself for arrogance, for the performed boredom of a man who has cultivated distance as an aesthetic. What I had not prepared for was the look of someone who has just remembered something they did not know they had forgotten. His jaw was set. His eyes were moving across the silk the way eyes move when they are trying to absorb something too large to take in at once. For 4 seconds, the 5 centuries of accumulated authority fell completely off him. He looked like a man who was grieving something he couldn't name. Then it passed. The composure returned the way a surface reclaims its stillness after a stone, complete and efficient. He turned to Aldrich Fenn, who had materialized silently at his left shoulder. "At this pace," Declan said, his voice carrying the mild tone of someone discussing a logistical inconvenience, "she'll have the commission finished sometime next decade." A brief pause. The wilted lily manages to look productive while producing very little. A talent of sorts. He said it the way you say something you intend to land, not loudly, not dramatically, but at exactly the volume and angle to reach the person 3 feet away. I trimmed a thread. My hands did not shake.
I was meticulous about that.
I heard them leave. I kept working until the lamplight began to fail, and then I covered the second silk and put my tools away with the deliberate care of someone who is using the ritual of tidying to keep their hands occupied and their face arranged. I went to my room. I ate the food on the tray. I poured tea. The cup rattled in my hands so badly I set it on the floor. I sat on the edge of the bed and wrapped both hands in the cloth I kept on the nightstand, pressed them together inside it, held pressure against the trembling until it began to subside. The old wool smelled of the cedar I stored it with, and of something older, something from my teacher's workroom that I could not have named, but recognized the way you recognize a voice in another room before you can make out the words.
I sat there for a long time.
Then I got up, found the small notepad I carry in my coat pocket, and made a list. I am good at lists. I have always been good at lists. My husband used to say it was my way of performing certainty when I had none, and he was right, and I loved him for saying it, and he has been dead for 6 years, and some truths you carry without resolution. The list was thorough. I had the return terms in the contract. I had read it 3 times before signing. I always read contracts 3 times. I had enough saved to rent somewhere for 2 months while I found the next commission. My health was not yet compromised in any irreversible way. The tremors were manageable. The cold in my left hand some mornings was not, strictly speaking, normal, but it was not alarming enough to constitute a medical event, and therefore did not obligate me to stop. The reasons covered half a page.
They were sound.
They were logical. They were the kind of reasons a careful woman makes when she knows the right choice and is working up to making it. I folded the list in thirds, creased it precisely, and put it in the nightstand drawer. Then I went back to the loom. The second silk was waiting in the dark, half-formed, pulling faintly at the air around it the way all unfinished work does, that particular low insistence, like a sentence left without its end. I stood in front of it for a moment without touching anything. The cold from the north-facing windows pressed against my back. Lincoln at midnight is not quiet. There is always a freight train somewhere, moving something away from here, but the court was still, and the stillness had weight. I thought about the 4 seconds when his face had gone human. I thought about how my teacher in her last winter had said, "The work asks for what it needs, and what it needs is always more than you plan to give." I thought about the list in the drawer. I raised my hands to the loom. He was already in the chair when I arrived at 4 in the morning. Not sleeping. Vampires of his age don't sleep the way the younger ones do, in proper rooms with proper hours. He simply occupied the high-backed chair near the north window as though he had always been there, and I was the one who had just materialized. A tall man, white-haired in the way that suggests choice rather than age, with the particular stillness of someone who stopped needing to perform composure several centuries ago. He did not look at me when I came in. He was watching the covered silk on the loom. I knew who he was. The court's physician, Dr. Emmerich Voss. The staff spoke of him the way people speak of weather, not with fear exactly, but with the awareness that his attention, once it arrived, was not something you redirected. I hung my coat. I uncovered the loom. I began working. He said nothing for the first hour. That was the morning I understood he was not going to try to stop me. He came back the next morning, and the one after that. Always before dawn. Always the same chair. He brought nothing with him. No book, no pretext, and he left without ceremony when the household began to wake. I stopped registering his arrivals as interruptions and started registering them the way you register the presence of someone who has come to bear witness rather than to intervene. On the 4th morning, I finally asked, "How many did you know?" A pause. The particular kind that means the question landed precisely where I aimed it.
3, he said.
His voice, when he used it, had the quality of something that had been kept in a cool, dark place for a long time. Not cold. Preserved. You are the 4th. I kept my hands moving. And the other 3? He did not answer immediately. Outside, a freight train was passing somewhere beyond the iron gates, the low, carrying sound of something being moved across the flat land in the dark. "They finished their commissions," he said. The thread went taut in my fingers. I eased it. That was the whole of the conversation. It was enough. The second fainting spell happened at the worst possible time, which is the way these things tend to arrange themselves. Declan was receiving a delegation, 4 representatives from a territory dispute 2 states over, men in good suits with careful faces who had been sitting in the court's main hall for the better part of an afternoon. I had been summoned to present the completed second silk, which was standard practice. The commissioners liked to see the work in context, liked to understand what they were funding. I had done it before in smaller courts, and I knew how to stand correctly and say very little and let the work speak for itself. What I had not accounted for was that 3 weeks of glimmer draw, compounded by the particular exertion of the second commission, had left my reserves in a state I could not accurately assess from the inside. The room was warm.
I remember that.
The particular warmth of a space where too many bodies have been gathered for too long, the air gone thick and close. I was standing to the left of the display frame, watching the delegation's faces move through the sequence of responses, skepticism, attention, something approaching awe, when the floor did what floors do not do. It tilted. I did not go down hard. I had enough warning to reach for the display frame, and I got one hand on it before the floor completed its tilt, and I went down to one knee, and then the other, and the ringing began in my ears the way it always does, high and clean like a glass struck at the rim. The room was very quiet. Declan's voice, from across the hall, flat, unhurried, 3 words. Set her aside. Not to me. To Aldrich, who was nearest. The tone of a man dealing with a minor administrative disruption, a chair in the wrong place, a document out of order. The delegation watched. I was aware of them the way you are aware of an audience when you are doing something you did not intend to perform. Petra was beside me before Aldrich had taken a step.
She didn't ask if I was all right.
She already knew the answer and had decided it was not the relevant question. She got one hand under my arm and one at my back, and she said, very quietly, close to my ear, "There's a sitting room.
2 doors down. Can you walk?"
I could walk. She got a look from Declan as we passed, the specific look of a man recalibrating whether a staff member has overstepped, deciding they have, filing it for later. Petra met it with the expression of someone who has reviewed the cost of standing her ground and found it acceptable. I did not look at him at all. The sitting room was small and smelled of old paper and the particular staleness of a space that is cleaned but not used. Petra settled me into a chair and then stood, uncertain for the first time. Should I get Dr. Voss? No, I said. She stayed anyway, which was the right decision. On the opposite wall, a painting, a Nebraska landscape, large format, the kind of work someone commissions when they want to fill a space rather than say something. Flat land. An enormous sky, the color of the hour before rain arrives, but hasn't yet. A single line of trees at the horizon, small enough to suggest distance rather than presence. I focused on it until the ringing subsided. There is something steadying about flat land if you are not from it. No interruptions. No place for anything to hide. The sky gets the full square footage it deserves, and it turns out the sky, given room, is a great deal larger than you expected. I had decided, weeks ago, sometime between the wilted lily remark and the first morning I woke with my left hand cold to the wrist, that Declan Clifford did not get my tears. Not for contempt. Not for dismissal. Not for the particular cruelty of a man who mistakes deliberate indifference for strength and has been doing it long enough that he can no longer tell the difference. He did not get them. Petra sat in the chair across from me and folded her hands in her lap and did not try to fill the silence, and after a while the ringing stopped entirely. Better, she said. Yes. She nodded. She did not say, you should rest or you should slow down or you should reconsider. She was 24 years old, and she already knew that some choices are not requests for input. Women who have survived hard things, I thought, recognize each other, without introduction. The painting held the light from the single lamp. the flat land, the enormous sky. I kept my eyes on the horizon line, that small, distant row of trees, and breathed, and did not think about what the doctor had said. They finished their commissions. I thought about it anyway. I had been thinking about finished commissions for 4 days when I found it, not obsessively. The way you think about a sound you heard in the night, not with fear, exactly, but with the low, persistent awareness that you have not yet explained it to yourself. The doctor's words had not frightened me. They had simply taken up residence, the way certain truths do when you are not ready to act on them and not willing to release them. I kept working.
I kept not thinking about it.
I got quite good at not thinking about it by keeping my hands occupied every waking hour. The archive room was on the 2nd floor, behind a door that required Aldrich's key and a written request submitted 24 hours in advance. The court took its memory fragments seriously, catalogued, indexed, stored in shallow drawers lined with black velvet, each shard tagged with a date range and a brief notation in the archivist's careful hand. The system was meticulous. Torren Brecht had been maintaining it for 60 years, and he had the manner of a man who considers disorder a personal affront. He was standing at the far cabinet when I came in, and he did not look up. "Third drawer from the left," he said. "Commission for materials. They're already pulled." I crossed to the drawer. I lifted the first fragment, a shard no larger than my palm, cool to the touch, its colors running toward gray and steel, the particular palette of official memory, power exercised, decisions made, the documented centuries. I set it in the intake tray. The second fragment was cool as well. So was the third. The fourth was warm. I noticed it before I touched it. The drawer was still half open and I could feel it, not heat, nothing as simple as heat. The warmth of a room where someone has been sitting for a long time after they've gone. The warmth of a thing that has been held close and then put away and kept in the dark so long it should have gone cold, and hasn't. I picked it up. The colors inside it were old in a way the others were not. Not faded. Concentrated. A garden, or the memory of a garden, which is a different thing. The green was too green, the way green gets when you have loved a place and are trying to keep it. A woman's back. A dress, pale, moving slightly. The suggestion of humming without any sound. A child's hand, small, reaching, catching the hem of the dress and holding on. I stood there longer than I should have. "That one isn't in the commission," Torren said behind me. I had not heard him approach. I kept my eyes on the fragment. "I can see that," I said. "It's not indexed."
No.
A careful pause. "It came up in the last sort, buried deep in a secondary collection, the fragments the king has never voluntarily accessed. We flag them, but we don't act on them without instruction."
Whose is it?
He didn't answer. He didn't need to. The question had been a formality. I turned the fragment over in my palms. The warmth moved with it, followed the position of my hands. Old warmth. The kind that has been preserved by being entirely alone for a very long time, sitting in a dark drawer for, I could not calculate how long. Long enough. "Leave it out of the commission," Torren said. He was not unkind about it. He was the kind of man who delivers difficult counsel with precision because he has seen imprecision make things worse. Some of what gets buried stays buried for a reason. To bring it back into the light risks destabilizing him. The newer memories are still integrating. Adding an unindexed fragment from this depth could cause a rupture in the sequence. A pause. More practically, it risks his anger. I knew he was right. The fragment sat in my palms, warm and concentrated and entirely alone. "I'll note it in the commission log," I said. "As reviewed."
He accepted that.
He was too careful a man not to hear exactly what I had and had not said. I added it to the intake tray when he stepped out to take a call. I did not think about why. I am aware that this is not an admirable thing to say, that a woman of 41, a woman who makes lists and reads contracts 3 times and has buried enough people to understand the weight of consequences, should be able to account for her choices. I could not account for this one. I thought about the commission timeline and the thread tension on the third silk, and whether Petra had remembered to leave the lamp on low in the weaving chamber the way I had asked. I thought about everything except the reason. That night I woke at 3 in the morning, and my left hand was gone. Not absent. I could see it, lying against the blanket, perfectly ordinary. Gone in the other sense, the sense of no signal, no weight, no temperature. I sat up and looked at it for a moment the way you look at a word you have written so many times it stops looking like itself. I moved to the edge of the bed. I waited. The room had gone cold in the way only north-facing rooms go cold in a Nebraska December, the specific cold of air that has been pressing against old glass for hours and finally found a way through. Across the hall, the weaving chamber window had a line of frost along its lower edge, faint, the kind that forms in the last hours before dawn when the temperature drops its final degree. I watched it and waited for my hand to come back. It took 20 minutes. The feeling returned in pieces, first a low ache at the wrist, then warmth moving outward in increments, like circulation being restored to something that had been held too still for too long. By the time I could close my fingers without effort, the frost on the window had spread another inch. I filed this alongside the other things I was not telling anyone. The mornings the left hand woke cold, the ringing that lasted longer after each session, the specific way the light looked different to me now, flatter, as though one layer of it had been removed, and I had not noticed until the absence was already weeks old. A complete record, neatly kept, shared with no one. I am good at lists. I sat on the edge of the bed until the room began to gray toward morning, and I thought about the woman in the garden, her back to the viewer, her dress moving slightly, the child's hand at her hem, and I thought about the particular kind of grief that lives in a memory so painful a person buries it deep enough that they forget it exists. Forget they're even missing it. Walk 500 years in the space where it should be and never once feel the shape of it. I knew what I was going to do with that fragment. I had known since the moment it went warm in my hands. That was the thing I was not thinking about. The fifth silk nearly finished me. Not during the work. During the work, I was too focused to register what was happening. It was afterward, when I stepped back from the loom and reached for the lamp to turn it down, and my legs simply declined. Not a faint, not a fall, more like a very orderly withdrawal of cooperation, the body presenting its case through the only channel left available to it. I got one hand on the work table before I went down to my knees, and I stayed there on the cold floor of the weaving chamber for several minutes, looking at the grain of the wood, breathing. I counted the breaths. I got to 37 before I trusted my legs enough to stand. I made it to my room. I sat on the bed. I did not get up for the rest of the day. Petra brought food at noon, and again at 6. The noon tray I looked at for a long time. The smell of it reached me. Chicken, something herbed, and registered as information without producing any appetite. I ate half of it to stop the food from being something I had to think about and set the tray on the floor and lay back against the pillow and stared at the ceiling. The ceiling had a hairline crack running from the east corner toward the center. Old house, old plaster. It had probably been there for 40 years. I traced it with my eyes until the light through the window changed from afternoon white to the particular amber of early evening, and then I traced it back. Dr. Voss arrived at some point in the late afternoon. I did not hear him come in. He took the chair beside the window, not the one from the weaving chamber, a smaller one, ladder-backed, and he sat in it, and the room changed the way it changes when his presence settles into it. He stayed for 3 hours. He said, across the full span of those 3 hours, "The work is very good. It's the best of the commission." And later, near the end, with his eyes on the window, "You should sleep." 11 words. I counted. His presence was the kind that does not require maintenance. It simply occupied the room the way warmth occupies a room where someone who loved you spent a long time. Not their smell, nothing so specific, just the quality of the air, the sense that the space has been held by something and is holding it still. My teacher had that quality. My husband, in the last year when he was already going, had it in concentrated form, The gift of dying people who have made their peace, who take up no more space than they need, and leave the rest of the room available for you to fall apart in if you require it. I did not fall apart. I slept. He was gone when I woke, and the room was fully dark, and somewhere in the corridor outside, footsteps paused. I was not fully awake. Half conscious, the particular state where the body is alert before the mind catches up. I lay still and watched the sliver of light under the door. The footsteps did not enter. They did not continue down the hall. They simply stopped and held, and in the window's dark reflection, angled just enough to catch the corridor, I could make out the shape of a man, standing at an open door, not looking in, looking at a point slightly past the frame, the way people look when they are considering a thing they do not want to be caught considering. I watched him not look at me. I watched him make the decision. The footsteps resumed. The sliver of light under the door held steady, undisturbed. I turned onto my back and looked at the ceiling crack and felt nothing I am going to name. The kind of nothing that is not empty. The kind that has weight and temperature and the faint bitterness of something you expected and are still not prepared for. He kept walking. I already knew that. I had known it before the footsteps stopped. There is a word in my grandmother's dialect, a dialect that has maybe 40 living speakers left, scattered across 2 countries, for the specific quality of light that remains at a fire's center after the fuel is almost gone. Not the flame, not the glow. The thing underneath both of those, small and still, that is the last part to leave. She used it for people as well as fires. She had used it for me once after the baby died, when I had gone very quiet and very efficient for several months and stopped letting anyone see me sit down. Let through, she called it, her palm flat against my sternum. Still some let through. I had a word for what was left of my glimmer now. I could feel its edge. The way you feel a cliff's edge before you see it, not from looking down but from the change in the air, the way the wind starts coming from a different direction, the way the ground stops giving the same return under your feet. I had been feeling it for 2 weeks. I had been measuring it with the precision of someone who needed the measurement to be accurate and not to say anything about it. I had enough for one more commission. One more silk. Petra came in the morning and brushed my hair without asking. I was sitting at the small vanity, not looking at my reflection, looking at the window, at Lincoln waking up gray and deliberate in the December cold, and she simply appeared behind me with a brush from the nightstand and began, and I let her. She had a specific way of working from the ends upward, the way women learn to do when they have taken care of people who needed the care and couldn't ask for it. Patient. Methodical. Not making anything of it. The weaving chamber smelled of cold silk and the particular bitterness of the gum I used to seal thread ends, a smell I associated, by now, entirely with this house, this winter, this slow and deliberate expenditure of everything I had brought with me. I could smell it from here, faint, through the cracked door. My hands, resting in my lap, were still. At 4 a.m, Lincoln sends its freight trains through. You can hear them from this room, low, carrying, moving something away from here across the flat land in the dark. I had stopped finding it desolate. There was something reliable about it. The world still moving things, still conducting its ordinary business. Women who have survived hard things, I thought, recognize each other without introduction. Not because they are all the same, because they all know how to sit with someone in a room and not make the sitting into a performance. Petra set the brush down on the vanity. Neither of us said anything. After a while, I got up and went to the loom. The unindexed fragment was where I had left it, in the intake tray, warm still, impossibly, after all these weeks, as though it had been waiting to be used, and the waiting had kept it. I had known since the archive room which commission it belonged to. I had been thinking about everything except that for 5 weeks. I picked it up. I raised my hands. I began at midnight because that is when the house goes fully quiet. Not the performed quiet of a court managing its public face. The real quiet, the kind that falls when even the oldest vampires have retreated into whatever passes for rest in them, when the corridors stop carrying the low current of proximity and power and become simply corridors. Old wood, old stone. The particular silence of a building that has held too many secrets for too long and stopped finding any of them remarkable. I did not light all the lamps. One low, on the far table. Enough to see by. The loom did not need light from me. It would make its own, once the work began. I held the unindexed fragment for a long moment before I started. It was still warm. After all these weeks, still warm. I pressed it between both palms and stood with my eyes closed and let myself, for the first time, simply feel what it was. The woman's back, the pale dress, the humming I could sense the shape of without hearing it, the child's hand reaching up. The colors behind my eyes were the green of a place beloved enough to be remembered wrong. Too vivid, too concentrated. The way grief makes things brighter rather than dimmer when it has had enough time to become permanent. I thought, I should not be doing this. I raised my hands to the loom and fed it everything I had left. The let-through does not go all at once. That was the thing I had not understood until it was happening. I had imagined some clear threshold, a line I would cross, a moment of definitive release. What it actually is a long, continuous exhale. The gold at my center moving outward through my hands in a current I could not have interrupted if I had tried, feeding into the silken waves I could feel in my sternum long before I could see the light they made. The light came fast. The silk lit from inside. Amber first, then gold, then the particular warm white of something burning very cleanly. It spread across the north wall and touched the ceiling and the weaving chamber, which I had only ever seen in shades of gray and lamplight, turned a color I did not have a name for. Not yellow. The color of late afternoon in a garden. The color of a memory that has been kept warm in the dark for 400 years. I heard Petra at the doorway. I could not turn to look. I heard her press her hand to her mouth, not a sound exactly, the absence of the breath she had been drawing in. Dr. Voss arrived without sound, the way he always does. He took the chair by the window. I felt him settle into the room the way a weight settles, steady, final. He did not try to stop me. Of course he didn't. He was old enough to know the difference between a choice being made and a mistake being committed, and he had the particular grace of someone who has watched enough people give everything they had to something that mattered, to let the first be what it was. The garden built itself. I had not seen it in full before, only the fragment suggestion, its concentrated colors. Now it opened outward from the silk the way a room opens when a door is removed, more space than the frame should contain. A city in the background that was not any city I recognized. Old stone, arched windows, the specific architecture of a country that has stopped existing. The woman with her back to the viewer, her dress catching a wind I could not feel. The humming. I still could not hear it, but the silk could. The silk rendered it in the slight angle of her shoulders, in the way she stood with all of her weight on one foot, easy, comfortable, the posture of a woman who knows she is watched with love and is not performing anything. The child's hand at her hem, small fingers, holding on. I was dimly aware of a third presence entering the room. I could not turn to look. My hands were the only thing still working correctly. Everything else had gone the slightly distant quality of something I was observing rather than inhabiting. I kept them moving. The silk still needed the last of it. The colors in the garden center were not yet what they needed to be, not yet true, not yet the way the thing actually was, and I had enough let-through left for that, barely, and I was going to spend it on that, on making the center of it true. His voice from somewhere behind me, the intake of breath before a word. One word, maybe two. The beginning of a remark about theatrical exhaustion. I could feel its shape, the familiar shape of it, the tone I had catalogued across months without meaning to. It did not arrive. The silk completed itself. I went down. The loom caught me first, one hand still tangled in the lower frame, and then Dr. Voss was there, his hands sure and unhurried, lowering me the rest of the way to the floor. The cold of the stone came through my dress immediately. I was looking at the ceiling. The ceiling was gold. The whole chamber was gold. the silk still pouring its light outward in the low, steady way of something that has given everything and is now simply being what it became. I lay on the cold floor and looked up at a gold ceiling and breathed, and the breathing was easier than I expected, and I thought, the center was true. The colors in the center of the garden were true. I had made them true. I had enough for that. The silence arrived before the kneeling. That is the thing I want to be precise about. The silence came first. The specific quality of silence that falls when something in a room shifts in a way that cannot be taken back. A permanent kind of quiet. Then the sound of Dr. Emmerich Voss, who had not knelt to any living thing in 2 centuries, who moved through this world with the absolute economy of someone who has long since stopped performing deference for anyone going to both knees. Not to the king standing behind me, to the loom, to the garden in the silk, to the woman's back, to the child's hand, to what it held, to what it cost. The room held that silence for a long time. Then Declan Clifford made a sound I had never heard from him and will not try to describe except to say, it was not a sound a man makes when he has decided something. It was a sound a man makes when something has been decided for him, when the ground he has been standing on for 5 centuries is revealed to have been hollow, and the hollow thing he didn't know was missing turns out to be the size of a woman in a garden and a child's hand at her hem.
Low. Wrecked.
The sound of a loss arriving 400 years late. The warmth of the silk pressed against my face like a palm. I closed my eyes. I woke 3 days later with both of Petra's hands wrapped around mine, and the first thing I noticed was that my left hand was warm. Both hands were warm. The lethru, my grandmother's word, my private word, was not full. It was not close to full. It was the faint, tentative warmth of something that has been nearly gone and is, improbably, beginning again. Not restored. Beginning. The way green comes back after a long winter, not all at once but in increments, the first pale color appearing in the places the snow leaves last. I lay still for a long time, feeling it.
Petra did not ask if I was all right.
She already knew. She tightened her hands around mine and said nothing, and let the room be what it was. I did not know yet what had been said over the loom when everyone else had gone. I did not know about the dawn, or the cold floor, or the tapestry that no one was permitted to remove. I did not know the shape of what had broken open in that room and was even now, 3 days later, still open. I kept the not knowing carefully. The way you carry something fragile, not clutched, not gripped, held loosely enough that it can remain what it is. Sometimes what you don't yet know is the thing you need most to look forward to. If this reached something in you, the part that gives quietly, that keeps showing up even when no one is watching, there are more stories here. Women who carry more than they were ever asked to carry. Women who change men who swore they were finished with changing. If you want to find your way back to this feeling, subscribe. These stories are easy to lose in a feed that doesn't know what it has. Don't let them slip.